Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I am delighted to be joined by Tony Francola, who will be talking to you about Prepare for SharePoint 2016, IT Pro Best Practice for Managing Your SharePoint. Remember to join the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC17. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Tony in the questions window. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Tony Francola. Hello, Tony.
Hi, Shane. Hi, everybody. I hope you're having a great Tuesday today. And we are going to spice it up a little bit with SharePoint 2016 and operational best practices, as Shane said. So, Shane, let me start the PowerPoint and let me share my screen with everybody. Okay, so as Shane said, my name is Tony. I'm Office Servers and Services MVP. I am co-founder and CEO of Acceleratio, a company from Croatia, Europe, that creates tools for system administrators, SharePoint administrators, and Office 365 administrators. Our signature tools are SP Docket, which is the ultimate SharePoint administration tool, helps you better manage your farm infrastructure, permissions, and to audit and control your best practices. We have other tools as well for Windows, Citrix, Office 365, and SQL Server. So our flagship tool, as I said, SP Docket, is the basis of this presentation. So what we do with the tool, we analyze farms for clients and then create something we call best practices reports, where we check if the client infrastructure is configured according to the latest Microsoft best practices. And then some clients send us anonymous information about the most commonly failing best practices. So what I'm going to talk to you today is from our knowledge and from what we have gathered from our clients is what people mostly fail when configuring SharePoint and what are the typical mistakes you can make or the typical mistakes you can easily fix to improve your overall SharePoint infrastructure and everything that you have inside of your SharePoint. So Shane, let's do a quick survey here. So let's find out of our attendees if they are using mostly cloud or on-premises installation or maybe a mix of two. So let's quickly see what kind of audience we have today. So let me click on here. So, okay.
I've launched the poll here for you, Tony.
Okay, so if you can just click so we can get the results and see what kind of audience we have today.
Okay, I'm going to call out the answers to you in about 5 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, so we have 33% on-prem, 7% cloud only, and 62% are both.
Okay, great. So mostly people are using hybrids. That's nice to hear. So if we can do the next one, Shane.
Yep.
So let's try to find out what version of SharePoint are people using. So you'll be given choices from SharePoint 2007 to 2016, and then you also have SharePoint Online as well. So if you're using multiple versions, just choose the most commonly used. I didn't include SharePoint 2003 or any other prior versions of SharePoint. I know many people are mixing, so just choose the most common one that you use in your company.
And we'll give people 5 more seconds just to get their results in.
Okay.
I feel like I'm at Eurovision again.
12 points, 2016.
Okay, so the results from the jury are, for 2010 we have 11%, for 2013 53%, for 2016 13%, and 24% are online.
Okay, great. So only, I think you said 15% are using SharePoint 2016. So this presentation can be beneficial for anybody that's planning to either move to 2016, and then the second part of our presentation is going to be useful for everybody that is planning to either optimize their infrastructure for the current any current version of SharePoint. So the best practices that I'm going to talk about today are general, and they apply to all the versions of SharePoint. Most of them are applicable even to SharePoint 2007. Shane already said, so you can type all your questions to the Q&A box, and we are going to answer them at the very end of this presentation. If there are some more typical or more complicated questions, we are going to do that on our SP Docket blog. So if we get any interesting questions, I'm going to post a blog post next week with more details about your questions. So today's agenda is we will have two parts of this presentation. The first part of the presentation is going to be about what's new in SharePoint 2016. So I'm going to touch some of the features, especially from the infrastructure perspective, that have been changed or upgraded in the SharePoint 2016 compared to SharePoint 2013. And then in the second part of this presentation, I'm going to discuss in more general operational best practices for mostly 2010, 2013, 2016, but some of these things also apply to 2007. If I recall correctly, there was around, I think, 10% people still using 2007. So some of the stuff that you have here will be useful to you guys as well. But you will also see some of the changes that are being made in Microsoft and some of the new developments when it comes to SharePoint 2016. So let's take a quick look at what's new and updated in 2016 SharePoint version. So these are some of the key features that have been released as part of SharePoint 2016 release. I think it has been almost, I think more than a year now from the release of SharePoint 2016. Of course, all the people that are using SharePoint Online get most of these features even before. So if you're currently using SharePoint Online, that's something that's going to probably be shipped as part of SharePoint 2019 or something that's going to be released by Microsoft in the future. So these are some of the key areas that Microsoft invested when it released 2016 that help you with all these features from business perspective. Some of the stuff here is more from IT professional perspective, and some of this stuff helps you better manage infrastructure in terms of allows you to create hybrids, connect your SharePoint on-premises environment with your on-prem environment and things like that. So I'm going to focus on some of the more infrastructure stuff in this presentation today. So some of the stuff that is interesting is things like hybrid sites that allow you to connect your on-prem site to your online site. A hybrid presentation would require me to do a full webinar just on that. So I'm just going to scrape a little bit of the features that are available for you today. And then you will need to do a follow-up webinar with more information about hybrids. So we have hybrid sites allowing you to have a site that is synced between two different sites. We have hybrid follow, where you can, from your single user profile, follow different sites from on-prem and in the cloud installation. We have the ability to connect your Office 365 profiles with your on-prem installation. We can move OneDrive to hybrid scenario where your OneDrive is pretty much in the cloud. And then we have the ability to create a hybrid search where you can have a single search interface that crawls both your on-prem and your cloud installation. There are some features that have been discontinued in 2016. This is interesting for people that are planning to upgrade from a previous version. So for example, SharePoint Foundation does not exist in 2016. So if in a case if you are using SharePoint Foundation 2013 or 2010, you need to think about this and see how you can upgrade, because there is no SharePoint Foundation in 2016. There have been some changes when it comes to SharePoint standalone installations. So for production environments, Microsoft does not recommend you to have a single server installation. So a minimum of 2 servers would be required for any production SharePoint environment. So take note about that when you're planning to add more machines for your SharePoint 2016 installation. There are still options for you to have a single server installation for development or testing or something like that, but bear in mind that this is not any longer an option. There has been a number of features that have been discontinued. So Microsoft has removed the integrated forefront identity management from SharePoint. There have been some changes in BI capabilities. So we have seen a lot of push from Microsoft for people to move directly to Power BI, and SharePoint is becoming less and less an environment for hosting BI. So that's something, if you're planning to do a BI migration, that's something that you need to think about and find a proper place to store all your BI reports and BI stuff. We have seen discontinuation of tags and nodes when it comes to social. This is more or less moving to stuff like Yammer and other social components of Microsoft ecosystem. And for hardcore SharePoint people, unfortunately, with 2016, we haven't seen a release of SharePoint Designer 2016 and Infopad 2016. The older clients exist, so you can still for some scenarios use both SharePoint Designer and Infopad, but this is not something that you should bet on. When it comes to Infopad, there has been various developments, mostly for cloud, and here you can take a look at Microsoft Flow, Microsoft Power Apps, and things like that that can help you create custom forms and workflows around those forms. So this is something completely new that is coming from Microsoft. So this is how our timeline looks like today. So SharePoint has been released in March 2016, SharePoint 2016, and then there has been a feature pack in November of 2016 that has brought some additional features, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. We are currently somewhere here. I don't know exactly where we are, but let's say here. So Microsoft is releasing something they call a public update every month, and we are roughly in the first quarter or second quarter of 2017. There is an event tomorrow. Microsoft is hosting SharePoint Virtual Summit. I think it's tomorrow afternoon, and it's a free event. So, and they're planning to announce some new stuff for SharePoint. I don't know what exactly, but if you are interested, you'll probably see some announcements and some interesting features being announced tomorrow. So take a look at that and see what exactly is Microsoft preparing for all of us. But in terms of release cycle for IT professionals, this hasn't changed much from ages. So the only major changes are monthly public updates. So before public updates or cumulative updates were released every 2 months. So in the recent years or recent year, Microsoft has changed this to monthly updates. So you'll see every month there is an update patch for your SharePoint environment. And with all these ransom viruses stuff going on all over the globe, this is something that you should take a look at. I haven't seen any major security breaks in SharePoint recently. I'm not following that very diligently, but you should definitely take an eye on your farms and make sure they're up to date. What's new in SharePoint 2016 when it comes to release cycles is something they call a feature update or feature pack. So for last couple of releases from SharePoint 2007 to 2016, we haven't seen many features being shipped in between major versions. So you would have to wait for a new version to get something that's like a new business feature. Occasionally, service packs used to bring some smaller changes that would allow SharePoint to do something, or for example, to be able to be installed on a newer version of Windows that wasn't available when the initial release was made. So there were some changes in service packs, but the feature pack 1 for SharePoint 2016 is something completely new. So this package brings you new features, and in the next slide I'm just going to show you what new features are available in the SharePoint 2016 Feature Pack 1. And as you can see on my slide here, Microsoft is planning an additional Feature Pack 2 for SharePoint 2017, which is probably going to bring some of the SharePoint Online features that we already have in SharePoint Online back to 2016. There is no publicly announced date yet, as I know, so probably later in this year you will see a new set of features being released. And then in a year or so, or probably in 2019, you will see a new version of SharePoint coming out. So what's new in the feature pack? So one of the things that is very interesting for me, because what we are doing in our company, we work with clients worldwide, and we help them, as I said, better manage their SharePoint infrastructure. And one of the common problems that people were asking us to help them with is the ability to track all the actions being performed by SharePoint administrators in central administration and PowerShell and all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes of your SharePoint farm. And that hasn't been available in SharePoint before, but with the release of 2016 Feature Pack 1, Microsoft has introduced a new feature that pretty much allows you to audit all the administrative actions, and everything that happens in the back side of your SharePoint is being logged. There has been a lot of changes to min roles. I'm going to talk about min roles in more detail in a couple of slides, so I'm just going to leave it here. So min roles were enhanced. OneDrive was updated to a modern experience, so OneDrive now looks more like OneDrive in the cloud. There were some changes in the navigation, so the navigation was introduced, so giving you the ability to change that waffle that stands as a start button in your SharePoint farm. There was the ability to connect hybrid, so you can connect your on-prem environment with the online environment and do like a hybrid auditing where all your logs are being shipped to Office 365, and then in Office 365 you can analyze those logs with the built-in tools to find some events that you might be interested in. So we also have a hybrid taxonomy available, so you can share your tags, metadata between on-prem and Office 365 farm, and there has been some updates for OneDrive APIs in the on-prem environment. So when it comes to hybrid auditing, this is how it looks like. So when you connect your SharePoint online farm, SharePoint on-prem farm with your Office 365 environment, you can then ship all these logs, and then you can do various searches. So for example, if you want to search for all the people that deleted the file, you can select such an action, and then Office 365 engine is going to search through all the logs that were updated, and then you will be able to see who made a change. So they have much better UI in the cloud for stuff like this. So that's why they are giving you this ability to connect your two environments and be able to use this built-in UI from Office 365. We also have the ability to create a hybrid taxonomy. This feature, although it was released, it's still in preview, so this is not something that's yet production ready, but you can connect your on-prem farm and on-premises farm and then do some synchronization between these different stores. I already mentioned the administrative logging. So the first slide you have seen mostly does the auditing, where you can connect your auditing from your SharePoint site collections, so publicly facing, something that your users in the company are using. But these events are in the central administration, and then you can track who has created a new site collection, who made a change, who deleted something, and things like that. So you can choose all of these actions, and this is how this looks like. So, for example, I see that somebody made a change on a particular service application or a database, or something new was created. So, for example, here we are showing you in our tool how somebody created a new content database, or if a feature was enabled, and things like that. So you have a fairly comprehensive database in the backend, and then you can use either our tools, or you can use PowerShell to retrieve all that and see for yourself what exactly has happened, especially if you are trying to troubleshoot some problematic situation in your company. So when it comes to upgrading to SharePoint 2016, the story hasn't changed much from before. You need to have a previous version of SharePoint, and in such case that is SharePoint 2013, and this SharePoint 2013 needs to be on the Service Pack 1 with March 2013 public update. So this is the minimal version, and this is the version number because otherwise nobody would know if you have the right version. So if you have SharePoint 2013 today, you need to make sure that you are running at least this version of SharePoint, otherwise you won't be able to upgrade. If in case you are running a previous version, so SharePoint 2010 or 2007, there is no direct upgrade path for you guys. There are two options for you basically. You can either do step-by-step migration. So for example, if you are upgrading from SharePoint 2007, you could potentially spin up a SharePoint 2010 farm and then SharePoint 2013 farm, and then do like 3 upgrades to get to the latest version. Of course, there are many third-party tools that you can take a look at, and many of these are going to save you of the headache to having to build all these farms and upgrade from scratch. This also gives you, if you choose a third-party route, this gives you the ability to maybe reorganize your content and do some changes in the actual structure of your data, sites, and document libraries. So yeah, database attach is the only out-of-the-box way to do it. There are other tools that can help you recreate your farms. One of them is AutoSP installer that can help you. You can script the farm, and then the farm you can provision multiple farms based on the same AutoSP installer template. There are some new developments. I didn't include that in the slide, but you also have a SharePoint desired state configuration option. So this is also a PowerShell. Desired state configuration is something that Microsoft is creating, and this is allowing you to provision stuff based again on the PowerShell script that you have, and then you can copy and have farms that are configured in pretty much with the same configuration. So take a look at AutoSP installer, but also take a look at SharePoint desired state configuration on GitHub. So that is available on GitHub. SharePoint 2016 does not support 2010 mode. So if you remember, when we upgraded from 2010 to 2013, we had the ability to retain the look and feel of 2010. And if you currently have those sites in your 2013 site collection, make sure their interface has been updated to 2013 look and feel. So this is something they call compatibility level, and these are the 2 PowerShell scripts or PowerShell commands that are going to give you all the sites that are currently not in the correct compatibility level. So before you even plan to upgrade, you need to make sure that these are upgraded to the latest 2013 version, because there is no concept. So when you go to SharePoint 2016, you won't be able to retain the look and feel of 2010. So there is only one look and feel for 2016, and that's 2016 look and feel. Okay, this brings us to minerals. So Microsoft, in the recent 10 years or even more, while they are hosting your SharePoint in SharePoint Online environment, they have learned a lot of things, and they are pretty much baking the knowledge they have now from managing the largest SharePoint farm in the world, and they are putting all these engineering developments and stuff they learn as they manage their own infrastructure into SharePoint 2016 or the 2019, whatever comes after 2016. So the change here is about roles of SharePoint servers. So SharePoint server did not have let's say, a dedicated role. You could disable some of the services and make a server run as an app server or web front-end server or something like that, but there were no dedicated roles. In 2016, there are dedicated roles, And these dedicated roles are pretty much divided into 4 different categories. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. But the key differentiator here is you have servers that are interacting with the user. So, for example, serving pages and HTML. Then you have servers running in the background, like search and some provisioning and timer jobs, stuff that do not touch the user, or user does not touch those things. And then you also have a caching service that catches all the content to make sure that your servers or your pages are fast in rendering. One of the benefits that we get out of this is the ability to have zero downtime patching. So if you think about Microsoft infrastructure, they cannot allow themselves to have SharePoint down for a day while they patch all the servers. So they had to figure out a way how they can pretty much have a system where they can upgrade your servers and you don't even notice that this is happening. So some of the key changes is they are developing a system, so the new updates are have much smaller footprint, and this allows you to perform much faster installation, and allows you to, if you have enough servers, you don't need to take any downtime, if that is important to you. Of course, if you're managing a smaller farm, that's not important, and you'll probably just send an email to everybody and say SharePoint is going to be offline on Saturday. And if that's okay for your business operation, you don't need to have as many servers as people have that need, that require a situation without downtime. So this is how a typical 2013 configuration would look like. So in this scenario, I have a SQL cluster up here with 3 SQL servers, and then I have 2 application servers and 2 web front-end servers. And I have some back-end servers like a caching server and search server in the background. So in 2016, the new feature is they are introducing min roles. So these are the default min roles. They have this is the front-end server. Front-end serves everything related to users. We have an application server. This runs the backend stuff like crawling, and it serves as an application server for timer jobs and stuff like that. Then we have a caching server. Caching server caches the stuff in your environment, and then we have a search that's pretty much responding to all the requests related to search. We can also have a custom server, and this server is pretty much you do whatever you want. And what Microsoft typically recommends for a custom server is that you use it for hosting some of your third-party stuff, your third-party jobs, maybe some third-party application, things like that. So there are other roles as well. So for development and testing and stuff like that, you can use a single server farm. So this is the server that hosts everything. So it doesn't have other servers. And as I said already, for custom, you can use anything in the custom server role. So this is how a typical zero downtime patching farm would look like. So if you want to have zero downtime patching, you need a minimum of 8 servers, because every single role needs to have 2 servers. So this is what is required for you to have in order to have zero downtime patching. SQL Server is not part of the zero downtime patching story, so it's just shown here to have a complete picture. So in order to have zero downtime patching, you would need to deploy your patch, and then the process is one of your servers would just be removed or revoked from the farm. It would be patched, and then in the next step, you would patch the second one. So the second one would be removed. That's why you need to have 2 of the same each role, and then each role has a duplicate, and you can do zero downtime patching with min roles. Of course, some of the clients complained and said, well, it's 8 servers, that's too much, and I also need to have SQL servers, so that's too many licenses for me to purchase. And Microsoft made a change in 2016, Feature Pack 1, for people that have medium and smaller farms. So they have introduced something somebody has called a mini-min role, so it's like a combination of min roles. So in this case, we have a min role that's a combination of two different roles. So we have a front end with distributed cache, and we have application with search. So this one gives you like a combination of the two, and then you can have just 4 servers for your zero downtime batching farm. When installing, you can choose which role you want. So for example, when you're installing and you say, okay, I want front end here, or you can choose something else. And as you can see, these are the four original roles plus custom role. And then we have these new called shared roles that combine some of the dedicated roles. And then you also have a single server farm. Once you install it and say, my server will be front end, and then you change your mind afterwards, you can go to central administration and then choose a different role for that particular server as well. Central administration has a health check that checks that front end is only running the services that need to run on the front end. So, for example, if somebody goes in and disables a service, the health check is going to check for that, and it's going to notify you that something is wrong and that your role hasn't been configured or is not running all the required services. So if we talk about minimum roles patching, so this is a scenario where you have only 4 servers. The process is the same. You patch one, and then you patch the second one of the same type. Okay, so this was a short introduction to 2016. And we are at the next part of our presentation. And now we're going to talk about more general best practices, not just 2016, but we're also going to talk about other SharePoint servers as well. So you guys already submitted your survey. This is something we did late last year. So this is how our clients responded on what are the typical SharePoint versions they use. So we see that the majority of people are still using 2013 and 2010 yet still. So there we have a mixture of different people using different SharePoint versions. So this was late 2016. And our friends from SPCAF, from Rancor, did a very similar survey. They used a different methodology. So you can see here that people use different SharePoints in the same time. So we have people using SharePoint 2013 and 2010 at the same time. And what we have seen in the latest years is a reduction of older versions. So there's less people using SharePoint 2010 and 2007, which is normal, and a slight increase in SharePoint Online and SharePoint 2016 usage. When it comes to best practices, there are some hardcore baseline best practices that everybody that is managing SharePoint farms should take care of, and some of the basic stuff is your hardware usage requirements. So these are the requirements from the MSDN. So this is for 2016, but it hasn't changed much from 2010, I would say. So it's just slightly increased over time in terms of how much memory and CPU you need for running SharePoint installation. So this is something that you should take care of, and you need to make sure that your servers have enough memory and CPU power to run your SharePoint. So most problems arise when you don't have enough memory. CPU, that's fairly typical, 4 cores for most scenarios, but this is something that you should take care of and make sure that you are running adequate memory for your service. When it comes to upgrading, so even though if you are not planning to upgrade today, I would advise you to plan to upgrade your current SharePoint to the latest version or to the latest stable version, just to make sure that you are eligible to upgrade. So for example, if you are planning to move to SharePoint 2007, from 2007 to 2010, this is your minimal build. So even though you might not be planning an upgrade project today, just make sure that you are upgraded to the latest version that can be upgraded to the latest version, because that's something you need to plan for. And if you are having a lot of content, this is not something that you can deploy quickly, and you need to plan time for that and upgrade and update your SharePoint to the latest version. This slide lists all the supported versions for upgrades. So for all the combinations that we have today, 2007 to 2010, 2010 to 2013, and 2013 to 2016. So just make sure that you are either on these versions or a version that's greater than these. There are other components in the system that also need to update it, so people sometimes forget about that. We often meet with clients that have somebody who is managing SharePoint, but maybe he or she inherited this installation from somebody, so there are things that he or she doesn't know, and there are other components in the system that are required to be updated as well. So one of the components available for 2010, 2013, 2016 is Office Web App Server, or the new name is Office Online Server. That pretty much the purpose of this server is to serve Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Office documents as web pages. So this one needs to be updated as well. You need to update App Fabric in 2013. This is a special component. If you have language packs, if you have SharePoint in different languages, you also need to deploy a language pack update. And if you're running SharePoint 2013 and 2010, and you have SharePoint, you have a project server, this one also requires an update. So as I said, and I'm going to show the results at the very end. From some clients, we collect anonymous information about most commonly failing best practices. And what we have seen as a pattern is that the majority of failing best practices is for databases. So it seems that SharePoint administrators completely forget about their databases and how they should optimize and configure their databases. So here are some of the very generic best practices. I have some more detailed one in the following slides, and I also have links for the knowledge base articles that we have created that can help you better understand why you need to do this, like why you need to do some things like in some way, and why is that a best practice. So one primary best practice: if you have a SQL server, you should never ever have database and transaction log files stored on your primary drive. So you need to have multiple drives and store these files on multiple drives. People sometimes forget, somebody else provisions a virtual machine for them, and then the virtual machine only has a C drive, and then this can be a problem. It also it is recommended that you have multiple drives, not just one secondary drive, but also multiple drives, because this can improve performance of your SQL server. When it comes to TempDB, so TempDB is a database where your data goes through while a SQL server is preparing it to be served, and it is recommended that you have a TempDB that is pre-ground, so it doesn't. You should not leave it on the default size. The TempDB size should match the size of the largest content database when it comes to SharePoint, the content database you have. And you should also adjust the number of files for TempDB to match the number of cores that you have in your system. Also, it's very important that TempDB sits on a fast drive. So there is a SQL query. I'm going to give you a link for that one as well, that can check if your TempDB response times are according to the latest best practices. Because if TempDB is too slow, then all the queries that are coming to your SQL server are going to be slow as well. You can increase the disk allocation size for your databases, so this can improve your disk performance. If you are doing a lot of changes or provisioning new sites, double check your ModelDB size. So if you have a ModelDB that's, for example, set to create a database of 10 megabytes, then all your databases, new databases, are going to be created according to that model. And that is not completely true, because some of the SharePoint stuff, it completely ignores ModelDB. So there is like a very long article on the MSDN explaining which commands in SharePoint do take ModelDB as a model for your future databases, and some of the unfortunately some of the commands ignore that. But you need to be aware of that, and just make sure that ModelDB is set to the size, and then try to avoid those things that do not use ModelDB as the model. SharePoint requires max degree of parallelism to set to 1. So this applies to SharePoint 2013 and better. Some database administrators do not like that, and they sometimes go into your database without SQL Server without knowing what this setting is required, and then they might change it, and this is going to cause many problems for SharePoint. So if you have a SQL Server for SharePoint, and it's always recommended that this is a dedicated instance for SharePoint, because then you can set these things to required values, and you don't need to worry about some other third-party application that requires some other setting and things like that. So this is going to help you to have a clean installation. For any time that you are planning to install SharePoint and use SQL Server, it's always recommended to use aliases, because if you, for whatever reason, need to move your SQL Server to another box or something like that, this is going to probably require you to reinstall the entire SharePoint. So it's always recommended to use aliases, because in that case, you just need to point your alias to a different IP, and you will be able to move your content without much trouble. Also, take a look at database autogrowth and initial size, because if your content databases are created and provisioned as very small databases, and then you continuously add and increase them, you might have a lot of fragmentation in your database, and the files might be scattered around your system. So just make sure that you have enough space in your content databases. Try to plan a little bit around that to see, okay, this is going to be an archive and it's going to be this big. Just try to pre-ground the database if anyhow possible. We have also seen that for many people, when they are deploying custom code, so web parts and features and stuff like that, we have seen that if they have multiple web servers, that all the changes are not propagated correctly. So many people have differences in web config files across different servers, and the same code is not running. The same version of code is not running on every single server. This is slightly changing in the latest years, because Microsoft is introducing a new model where you're hosting your apps somewhere else, and then they're just connected with your SharePoint. So this is a much better approach, because it leaves you with a clean SharePoint installation, and you don't need to worry about things like that, and you don't need to deploy DLLs to GAC or change web config files for SharePoint. So, but if you are running an older version of SharePoint, let's say to 2007, 10, 13, this is something that you still need to check on. So one common question when it comes to updates is, what is the currently recommended public update or cumulative update? It's hard to answer that question like this. You definitely should install service packs and all the major updates. But when it comes to all these cumulative updates, you don't necessarily need to install it on immediately, especially if you're not affected with stuff that has been fixed in these cumulative updates. So you don't need to do it all the time. You can do it when you choose to do so. I typically refer people to Todd Klein's blog, where he has a list of all the updates, and you're seeing what you're seeing on your screen is the table from his webpage, his blog, where he has the cumulative updates for every single version of SharePoint, and then you have a knowledge base article and downloads and notes and stuff like that. So it's much easier for you to track, to see what version exactly you're running and what changes are coming in the next cumulative update. The other link takes you to the Microsoft web page that has very similar setup information. So if you're looking about information, I would definitely recommend you to bookmark these two pages, and then you'll be able to find out what exactly is hidden inside of these cumulative updates. I already mentioned, for people that are using 2013, make sure that you are using the latest UI version, because otherwise you won't be able to upgrade to 2016. When it comes to primary drive, I already mentioned that for SQL. So SQL databases and SQL logs should not be on the primary drive. When it comes to SharePoint, the same thing applies. Logs should not be on your primary drive, because if somebody configures your logs to be verbose and forgets about it and goes to holidays or something, and you'll see drives runs out of space, you might have a problem with that, and your server will probably shut down and you will need to recover it. Also, there is an option inside of SharePoint. You can restrict your ULS logs. I'm not encouraging you to disable ULS logs. You should definitely enable them, but you need to restrict them to a certain size that you can manage and put them on the secondary drive. And if you are not troubleshooting something specific and something problematic, you should not use verbose in day-to-day operations. Search indexes, they can also be on separate drive, not on your primary drive. The same applies for IIS. IIS also has logs. You can move those logs to secondary drive as well. When you are managing a farm for a larger organization, you should definitely take a look from a security perspective and find out who are your people that have privileged access. So these are the administrators that can give themselves rights to content. So you might have a top secret site collection, like this one here, and then you will notice that I am actually a private administrator. So that means that I can go into this site collection and I can get information about all the content, so I can go inside. But I can have somebody else here who is not currently an owner of this site collection. But since this person is a farm administrator, that means that she can also go here and make herself, let's say, secondary administrator. And from that point on, she will be able to go inside and see the content. And this is very interesting with all the WikiLeaks stuff going on and private documents being shared publicly. So just make sure that you know who your farm administrators are, who are your site collection owners, especially if you have content that's highly classified and stuff like that. So you need to make sure that you are covered and that you know who your farm administrators are. This is very important from a security perspective. One of the common things that has been a problem for many years in SharePoint is loopback. So Microsoft has introduced this in SharePoint Server 2003, and this caused problems for many people because some of the SharePoint services that are running on that particular machine do not know how to connect to the machine, or they are being rejected because there is a security check disable of loopback. So there are two methods outlined in this article how you can prevent that. So you can configure your server to ignore these requests and allow people to connect to the same service. So if you are running SharePoint on a server, you need to make sure that this is configured correctly. Yeah. One of the typical problems people also encounter is the maximum size of their site collections. So content database size for most general scenarios should not go over 20 gigabytes. So you should definitely take a look at that and see how big your databases are. And you need to plan ahead for that. So if you are going to host a lot of content inside a content database before you start, you should definitely take a look and try to plan a little bit ahead of that, and maybe separate your site collection to different site collections. So for example, if you have sales and marketing site collection, maybe you should separate them to sales and marketing into different databases. So that can be useful. Of course, if you are stuck with a large database, you can use some of the third-party migration tools to move content from one database to another, just to decrease the size of this database. Because a larger content database can have a lot of problems, starting from backup. It's going to take a lot of time, restore as well, and then performance issues and stuff like that. So there are some scenarios. Microsoft does support you to have larger databases up to 4 terabytes, but this requires you to have very fast disk drives, and also this particular scenario, this is only for archive databases and stuff like that. So just try to plan a little bit and make sure that you are on the right sides for your databases. When we are talking about third-party stuff, especially stuff that goes inside of your SharePoint, make sure that if you are in charge of controlling the developers, make sure that you are checking what they're doing. So there are some tools available from Microsoft, like StyleCop, making sure that the code is okay. For older versions of SharePoint, we also had SP dispose check. This was checking if your developers were disposing memory correctly. Otherwise, if not, they could cause memory leaks. There is a nice third-party tool called SPCAF available at this address that pretty much can go inside of your SharePoint, grab your stuff, and see if there's some code that's not according to the latest best practices. I already told you a little bit about aliases. You should also take a look at the URLs. So if possible, do not use the URL of your machine name as your SharePoint URL. Go to DNS and configure something that can be that's more generic, like intranet or portal or something. Because if you ever decide to move to a different box or introduce more boxes, then having a baked URL is going to cause you a lot of problems. You should definitely use SQL alias. For some people that we talk to, best practice is also that you install SharePoint in a separate domain. So this gives you a little bit of more flexibility if a company merges with somebody or if they require you to change the domain, because this is going to require you to reinstall the SharePoint. But if you start from scratch and build SharePoint inside of a dedicated domain where you can control security and everything, this might be a good solution if you are building a large farm, so you have a subdomain called SharePoint just for your SharePoint service. Okay, then you need to make sure that all the services and proxies are running. So people often forget that there are background services that sometimes are not running and stuff like that. So just make sure, go through your list of services running on server and make sure that these are running. Make sure that proxies are started as well, because this can cause problems for users if they are not running. And also, if you were testing something, just make sure that you delete all the duplicate applications. So sometimes people forget that they have multiple service applications doing the same thing. So just make sure that you don't have any duplicate applications that you actually don't need. One of the common problems that we see for people don't actually enable blob caching. So this allows SharePoint or IIS to cache some of the, as you can see here, pictures and the CSS files, JavaScript files, and stuff like that. So all these things are then cached, and this improves performance of your web front ends because they can serve this content from this drive in a much faster way than retrieving them from the database. If you're using publishing pages, you can also enable publishing on that page, those pages as well. So SharePoint has a built-in caching mechanism that helps you either cache in the public cache, or you can also enable object cache and make sure that you configure object cache user accounts. So this is one of the typical mistakes, and it's explained here, but I also have a link at the very end. So when you get this presentation, just go to our portal, and then there will be a step-by-step instructions on how do you set up super user reader and super user account. Make sure that all your servers are updated. So this is very important. I already told you. So sometimes people that are managing infrastructure in general, they just deploy SharePoint updates, but this is not the end of your process. You need to go to your configuration wizard, and you need to run the configuration wizard, because the run of the configuration wizard makes sure that your content databases are updated. Of course, when you do that, you need to also make sure that you did that on all the servers, because sometimes people install it and configure it on one, and they think, okay, this is I'm done, but you're not actually done. You need to make sure that you run configuration wizard, and that you run configuration wizard on every single server, and this is going to patch everything inside the system. One other thing that you need to take a look at is a claims-based authentication. So this was available as a mixture of before in SharePoint 2010. From 2016, everything needs to be in the claims-based authentication. So if you have something in the classic mode still, you can use the PowerShell command to convert SP web application, and this is going to convert you to claims-based authentication. So potentially, if you have some third-party code that doesn't know how to work with claims, this could be a problem. But if you have a vanilla SharePoint, this is not going to cause you any problems. But this is just for your reference, and there's a TechNet article that explains that in more detail. Majority of stuff, or almost I think everything that I mentioned today is available at our portal, bp.spdocu.com. So here we explain all the common mistakes people make and how they fix them. So just if you are interested to learn more, just go to this web address, and there is like a lot of best practices there. As I said, we did the analysis of what people are typically having misconfigured, and these are some of the best practices that are typically failing. Some of those we discussed today, so loopback checks, not enough memory, not enough free disk space, database autograph misconfigured, database capacity, blob caching was not enabled and stuff like that, caching of publishing cache and stuff like that. So there's many things that typically happen to people, and these are the 15 most common ones. Every link here takes you to the article that explains in more detail how to fix that. I think I mentioned most of these today. And if you want to learn more, this is the place where you can do that. We are running out of time, so I'm just going to skip the Q&A for right now. So Shane, do we have any questions that you want to discuss now, or?
Yeah, sure, Tony, and thank you for a great presentation. First question, can we still create InfoPath form in SP16?
I think you can. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't created any in 2016. You can still use 2013 InfoPath from Office 2013 to create them and to publish them, and they are still going to render. But you need to read through Microsoft support articles so that you can understand what exactly is the future here. And I think the support for InfoPath will be at least, or it was at least 10 years when SharePoint 2016 was released. So just double check on that before you get stuck with something that you cannot upgrade or things like that. So do it, but be very cautious about that.
Okay, great. There's a lot of people wondering, can the presentation be made available? If you want to send it to me, Tony, I can send it to
no problem.
here.
No problem.
That's great. Okay, that's brilliant. Next question is, can we use DB size more than 200 gigabytes in some scenarios?
Yeah, one of the scenarios that was listed on that article, and you can definitely learn more at TechNet, is for archiving, and there is very specific hardware requirements for that if you have a larger database. What Microsoft is currently doing about what we have in SharePoint Online is they already increased the maximum size of the databases, and I'm guessing that's coming fairly quickly, coming soon to SharePoint On-Prem for people that want to have larger databases. Of course, 200 gigabytes is not a hard limit. You can go over that, and I don't think anything is going to happen to you, but just you need to be very cautious about it, and if you see any performance degradation, that might be causing it.
Excellent. Excellent, Tony. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate your input today.
Thank you. Thank you, guys, for having me.
Thank you, Tony. All right, let me just get back on track here. Okay, and we're back. Okay, join us for our next webinar with Sebastian Levert on From SharePoint to Office 365 Development, the Path to Your New Playground. This is happening next Wednesday, May 24th, 2017 at 3 p.m. CEST. And the details are just coming up here on your screen. That's the next webinar next week. That is it for now. Thank you all for attending and have a great day.